The mountains rose high, bathed in the sunlight that struck their middle peaks. A small group of hunters had gathered there, standing before a man who struggled to stay upright. He balanced himself with one hand pressed against the ground, trying to regain his strength. His body was battered and bruised, painted in deep shades of purple from the injuries he had endured. In his hand he clutched a broken sword, a shattered remnant of his strength. He was the swordsman Ansuho. Standing before him, the warrior Alex Morgan scoffed, calling out that a guy with a broken sword trying to act tough was just pitiful. He said it would have been better if An had joined them from the beginning and that public servants were always so stubborn. Beside him, Mage Suzuki Endo smirked and agreed, saying that no matter how much people called him the sword god, innate talent was just different after all. She added with a sneer that she hated guys who wore suits, looking down on Ansuho dressed in his three-piece suit. An coughed harshly into his hand and stared at the black tar-like substance that came from his mouth. Rage boiled inside him as he shouted at them, his voice cracking with the betrayal he felt. He remembered clearly how he had helped them defeat the dragon, how he had fought alongside them through countless battles. An demanded to know how they could betray him after everything they had been through together. But Isabella, the healer, spoke coldly, saying that unfortunately it could not be helped, and that An was the only one standing against this operation. Clenching his teeth, An shouted back, asking if they had no shame. They had conquered one of the 5 disaster-level gates, and if they pushed forward, humanity would finally be safe. His voice rang out with all the strength he could muster, accusing them of putting humanity in danger by choosing to leave the gates open. But Hex Hood, the archer, interrupted him, saying that at least they were not slaughtering humans. He reminded An that if the gates disappeared, hunters would lose their place in the world and would be seen as nothing more than violent thugs. Hex Hood said that he liked An and urged him to join them, promising to accept him if he just agreed now. Hex Hood extended his hand toward Ansuho. An clenched his teeth, veins darkening as the poison spread through his body. After stabbing me in the back, you think you can say something like that, he growled. He could feel it now, there was not much time left. His body was overwhelmed by Suzuki Endo's venom and covered in wounds that could no longer heal. Survival was no longer an option. There was only one thing he could do. Gripping his broken sword tightly, An stared at the group of hunters who had betrayed him. If he could bring down even one of them for the sake of the remaining humanity, that would be his final duty as a hero. An stood tall, gathering what strength he had left. He began to chant, and a faint blue light formed around him. The wind thickened, swirling violently as the energy gathered. The hunters immediately turned their attention toward him. Alex Morgan shouted in confusion, "What the hell is that?" Suzuki Endo snapped, "Do not be scared, it is just a buff. After all, he is just a swordsman with a broken sword, right?" But Hex Hood moved quickly to shield Isabella and said, "No, something feels different." The light surrounding Ansuho grew stronger, the surge of power becoming almost unbearable. In the next instant, he moved like lightning, faster than their eyes could track. With his broken sword, he cut down anyone who dared stand in his way. In mere seconds, the battlefield shifted, and only Hex Hood and Isabella remained standing. Isabella cried out as she saw Suzuki fall, shouting her name in desperation. Hex Hood's mind raced, thinking that was quick. If I had been even a little slower, I would have been next. He raised his bow, taking position, but a creeping doubt filled his thoughts. How was Ansuho able to move like that with a broken sword? How could he cut through with a body so poisoned he should barely be breathing? Isabella scrambled to heal one of the hunters who was writhing in pain on the ground, shouting that she would heal him, her voice shaking with fear. Isabella placed her hands over the hunter's wounds, desperately trying to heal him, but the injuries would not close. She gasped, realizing that the wounds could not be healed. Her eyes turned toward Ansuho, whose broken sword was no longer shattered but restored into a complete blade, shining with a brilliant blue light. His eyes gleamed with the same intense glow, and his entire body was wrapped in a swirling blue aura. Isabella stared at him, whispering that she had only heard of it before. Was it the intense Gibble sword? An smirked and said that he had finally grasped it. But before he could move, something unexpected happened. His body lost its strength, and he stumbled back, falling off the edge of the cliff. As he plummeted downward, his body grew numb, his vision blurred, and his half-open eyes were filled with regret. Why now of all times, he thought. As he continued to fall, a series of notifications appeared before him. Congratulations, you have reached the realm of divine sword unity. Congratulations, you have awakened the ultimate swordsmanship. You have mastered the formless sword. You have acquired your first SS rank skill. Another notification followed, saying he would be granted the opportunity to become even stronger as the first to reach the realm of transcendence. Rebooting the system of player on Suho. Darkness enveloped him until his eyes suddenly snapped open. Though his vision was blurry, he realized he was moving, being carried by someone. A man in a rescue uniform was holding him tightly and running. Ansuho shouted out, confused, but the man responded, saying he was injured and needed to be taken to the safe zone because a precursory gate had appeared. Being carried towards safety, An thought to himself, a firefighter? I was sure I'd die. But as he looked around, his eyes widened in disbelief. Where is this? He murmured. He found himself in the middle of a city, and in the sky, a massive tear was visible, flames erupting from it. All around him, monsters roamed the streets, attacking people and overturning cars. His gaze fell on a bus station sign that read Senderim. He thought. Wasn't Senderim Station contaminated during the gate outbreak? This was the infamous Senderim Station gate outbreak involving goblins. It should have been impossible. Yet here he was, surrounded by goblins wreaking havoc. One of the goblins raised its spear and hurled it toward them. The spear struck the firefighters' back, sending both of them crashing to the ground, coughing and groaning in pain. An quickly pushed himself up and saw the goblin approaching fast. The firefighter screamed at him to run, but An ignored the warning. He grabbed the firefighter's axe and stood up, saying he would borrow it for a moment. Without hesitation, he charged toward the goblins. The firefighter shouted again that it was too dangerous to face the monsters, urging him to escape, but An pressed forward. He swung the axe with precision, striking a golem right on its head and knocking it down. Looking at his hands, he realized something incredible. There were no injuries. Before he could process it, a screen appeared in front of him. Congratulations. The awakening condition has been met. You have awakened as a player. The system desires for you to become even stronger. Seeing the familiar notifications, Ansuho let out a small laugh. It was exactly the same. Exactly the same as when he had first awakened as a player. A final screen appeared before him. Please choose the power you wish to pursue. Warrior, mage, archer, healer. Ansuho thought to himself that it was exactly the same as when he had first awakened as a player. His hand instinctively moved toward the warrior selection on the screen, but before he could touch it, the firefighter behind him shouted, telling him to run away quickly. An paused, his finger hovering over the option. He smirked and muttered that he almost chose warrior by reflex. Speaking clearly, he told the system to delay the selection. Then, turning back to the firefighter, An said that he did not need to worry. The firefighter looked at him, confused. An added that he could handle them alone. After all, they were just goblins. The goblins growled, their venomous eyes glaring at An, but he stayed calm, composing himself before suddenly sprinting toward them, unarmed. As he lunged forward, one of the goblins charged at him, swinging a sword, but An bent down, dodging the attack smoothly. Sliding behind the goblin group, he spotted the axe he had thrown earlier, still embedded in a fallen monster's head. He yanked the axe free and immediately turned to face another goblin. With a swift and powerful movement, he cleaved the goblin cleanly in two. The creature roared before collapsing to the ground. Without losing momentum, An grabbed the fallen goblin's sword, thinking that goblins might be a threat to beginner players, but they were nothing to someone like him. Holding the sword firmly, he said he would cut them all down. True to his words, An began slashing through the goblins at a speed so fast that they could not even react. In mere seconds, the entire group was cut to pieces. Standing amid the defeated monsters, An looked at the sword in his hand and thought, strangely, his anger had not subsided. Maybe he had gotten a little too excited. He reminded himself that he needed to stay cool-headed, especially now. If he was not mistaken, he had somehow returned to the past. This was clearly a rare opportunity. It was like starting over from scratch. As he gathered his thoughts, a notification appeared in front of him. You have mastered the diagonal slash. All stats have been increased. Another message followed. You have mastered step B. More notifications kept coming, announcing new skills and techniques related to swordsmanship. An smiled faintly, thinking about how long it had been since he had seen names like basic swordsman's skills. Though it was a bit short, the goblin sword proved to be useful here. The firefighter from earlier cautiously approached him and asked if he was a player. An simply answered yes. Without thinking much, Ansuho said out loud that he had made his decision and chose to be a healer. The screen appeared in front of him, asking if he was sure he wanted to walk the path of a healer. Without hesitation, An answered yes. The screen then confirmed that he had become a healer, awarding him 5 bonus stats and granting him the skill Healing Light. Without wasting any time, An walked toward the firefighter, noticing that one of his arms was injured. Placing a hand gently on the firefighter's shoulder, An said he would take a look at the wound. The firefighter, slightly puzzled, asked about the wound, and as he turned around, An saw an arrow embedded in his shoulder. Telling him to bear with it for a little longer, An focused his energy, and a soft blue light began to emit from his hand. Carefully, he pulled the arrow out, and immediately the healing light enveloped the wound, causing it to close up rapidly. When An asked how he felt, the firefighter rotated his shoulder in surprise and said it did not hurt at all, asking if An was a healer. An gave a small laugh, saying that it seemed like that was what he had become now. Suddenly remembering something, he glanced at the screen, which said the system wanted to offer him a small gift for using his first healing skill. It prompted him to select a weapon from the system's arsenal. An thought to himself that although he had chosen the healer class, his weapon was still. Before he could finish the thought, a golden energy started gathering in his hand, and the screen announced that he had summoned the beginner's sword. An gripped the newly appeared sword tightly, seeing his reflection on the shining steel, and declared with quiet determination that he would go conquer the gate. The firefighter shouted after him, warning that going alone was dangerous, but Ansuho did not listen. He simply walked forward with a casual wave, saying that it was all good and he had something to gain from this. As he moved, he thought back to what he knew. Just like he had acquired swordsman skills before ever choosing his class, the skills obtained through talent could be used freely regardless of class. And with each level up, the skills of his chosen class would automatically become stronger. He remembered Isabella's Holy Spirit Light, which had once started as a simple healing light. If he had been able to heal himself back then, perhaps everything would have turned out differently. Determined not to make the same mistakes, An vowed to become both a swordsman and a healer this time, someone who could survive and protect without regret. He needed to grow stronger, faster than anyone else, to acquire skills quickly and level up ahead of them. Thinking back, he recalled that this gate was no ordinary one. It was a premonition gate, unpredictable and dangerous. In his past life, he had almost died there, but now he felt it in his bones that things would be different. Though his skill level was low, and it might be difficult like before, he wasn't afraid. The swordsmanship engraved in his mind remained unshaken, and he could rebuild everything from scratch. Steeling himself, An walked toward the tear in the sky, the fiery vortex from which the monsters kept pouring out. Reaching out, he touched the gate, and immediately the searing red energy wrapped around him as he stepped into it. A screen appeared before him, confirming entry into the gate. When the light faded, An found himself standing in the middle of a dense, green world, a rainforest where the trees seemed endless and even the water shimmered a deep green. Another screen floated before his eyes, stating, Green Red Gate Entry Condition, Unknown. Maximum Entry Capacity, Unknown. An stepped lightly onto the green-tinted water and began moving forward, the ripples parting beneath his feet. As he advanced, he thought about the goblins that had been rampaging outside the gate, treating the outside world as if it were theirs. Looking around at the eerie silence, An noticed that the goblins inside the gate had already been slaughtered, their bodies strewn about, cut down or gravely wounded. He frowned, thinking that they must have escaped into the outside world, running away from something even worse. Suddenly, a crackling noise echoed through the air, and An stiffened. He knew what was coming. Here they are, he thought grimly, the real reason those goblins fled. That was why the gate had been named Green Red. Before him stood 2 hobgoblins, one level 10, the other level 12. Their skin was a dirty brown, their white hair matted, and short horns sprouted from their foreheads. Though they resembled goblins, they were massive in size, towering with bulging muscles and wielding deadly weapons. One of the hobgoblins pointed its stone sword at An, who smirked and thought, Are you trying to make me your prey instead of those goblins? Unlike regular goblins, these had blood-red skin, thicker bodies, and far greater strength. Without warning, the hobgoblin charged, swinging its sword down at him. Calmly, An blocked the attack with his own hand, the blade just inches from his face. Glancing at the crude stone sword, he mused, still, at the end of the day, it's just a goblin. When the hobgoblin launched another fierce strike, An swiftly leapt back, thinking, my level is still too low to slice through its tough skin. Then I just need to find its weakness, and explode it. Locking his gaze on his target, An dashed forward. As the first hobgoblin lunged at him, An vaulted high above its head, flipping midair, and landed with precision right before the second one. Without hesitation, he drove his sword straight toward the hobgoblin's eye, the blade piercing deep and true. The hobgoblin let out a furious roar as An stood calmly before it. Of course, An thought, this would be impossible if there was a massive difference in level, or if the monster's traits were overwhelmingly superior. But against a mere hobgoblin? No way. With sharp precision, An slashed his sword, twisting it after piercing the hobgoblin's eye, and then yanked it out to the side. The beast collapsed heavily onto the ground. Watching it fall, An scratched the back of his head, thinking, I killed it out of habit. I couldn't help myself. He turned around to face the remaining hobgoblin and said with a light chuckle, I guess I need to be a little more careful this time. I need to make use of it until I find another one. The surviving hobgoblin, enraged by the death of its comrade, roared and charged at An. Its heavy steps thundered across the ground as it swung its massive sword with wild strength. But An, calm and composed, easily dodged every blow, stepping backward and weaving out of range with effortless movements. If you repeat a specific action enough times, An thought as he sidestepped another attack, you can acquire a skill related to that action. He continued to avoid the hobgoblin's furious strikes, smoothly evading without wasting a step. As expected, after several perfect dodges, a bright screen popped up in front of him, declaring that he had successfully acquired a new skill mastered dodge. An smirked confidently and said, I have acquired dodge. Alright, now that I've got that, what's next? Gripping his sword tighter, he stared down the hobgoblin, who in turn gripped his own weapon with equal intensity. An took a deep breath, gathering energy around him. In an instant, a burst of force erupted, and he executed a new technique parry. It was a skill with a long history, once dedicated to a specialized weapon, and considered an essential foundation for many other advanced techniques. With it, An was able to block the hobgoblin's incoming attack midair without straining his hand or sword. A system message flashed in front of him, Congratulations. You have mastered parry. An thought to himself, that's fortunate. The hobgoblin roared in frustration, swinging its sword recklessly. An calmly thought, I'll just keep parrying until this guy gets exhausted. It's already over for him. Tightening his grip once more, An dashed forward in a blink and, with perfect precision, drove his sword into the hobgoblin's neck. The monster howled in agony, staggering before falling heavily onto the ground. An stood over it, thinking, I need to find more of them. Time to start earning experience points in earnest. Meanwhile, outside in the real world, several hunters had gathered in front of the gate, pounding on its swirling surface in frustration. One of the hunters gritted his teeth and said, No, seriously, who just barges into a gate without permission? What guild or faction is he even from? Another hunter, arms crossed, added coldly, I'm gonna give him a hard time when he comes back out. A third man scoffed and said, If he ends up dying inside, he's going to go down in history as a legend, though. Another stepped toward the firefighter who had been healed earlier and demanded, Hey, who the hell is that guy? The firefighter explained everything he had seen. The man raised an eyebrow and said, So you're telling me, a beginner player entered the gate? The firefighter nodded, replying, Yes. From the way he talked, it sounded like he had just awakened. But he dealt with a group of goblins all on his own, and after healing me, he entered the gate like it was nothing. He said he had something to gain from it. The man frowned, clearly disturbed. We didn't even arrive that late, yet he already cleared out all the goblins? And on top of that, he's a healer? That's just ridiculous. One of the men scoffed and said, We didn't even come that late, yet he already handled all those goblins? And he's a healer on top of it? That's just ridiculous. He stared at the cleared surroundings, frustrated. Looking at the fact that all the defeated monsters were goblins, it did not seem like a difficult gate. Still, he muttered, Are you really saying a healer is going to conquer a gate by himself? And he's able to wipe out a bunch of goblins this easily, without even a scratch? What the hell is that guy thinking? He shook his head firmly, convincing himself. No. He must have just gone in without thinking. There's no way a healer would be confident enough to enter a gate alone. But the thought lingered, however, if he really manages to clear the gate. His expression darkened. Turning toward one of his subordinates, he ordered sharply, "Report immediately if there's any change in the gate. And the moment someone comes out, report that too." The employee nodded and said, "Yes, understood." The man watched the swirling gate carefully and thought, if that happens, no matter what, we have to recruit that person into our ranks. Meanwhile, inside the gate, An was sprinting deeper into the rainforest without slowing down. Hobgoblins rushed toward him, some alone, some in groups, but An didn't falter. His sword flashed mercilessly, cutting down everything in his path. Green blood splattered across the forest floor, and the entire blade of his sword was soaked in it. Dozens, no, maybe hundreds of hobgoblins fell before him, yet An showed no signs of fatigue. His movements were sharp, clean, and filled with determination. He knew every battle, every kill was raising his level. He felt himself getting stronger, faster. In one encounter, after swiftly tearing through a group of hobgoblins, An intentionally spared one. He struck it hard enough to injure, but not kill. The hobgoblin clutched its neck, growling weakly. An smirked and said, "I'll let you go. Go on, bring your friends." The hobgoblin, trembling with fear and rage, stumbled away into the dense greenery. An shouted after it, his voice echoing through the forest, "Bring as many as you can." An stood there for a moment, and opened his system screen, thinking he might as well manage his stats while waiting for the hobgoblins to arrive. As he reviewed his status, he decided it was better to raise all his stats evenly rather than focusing on just one. He had received quite a few bonus points and caught a lot of monsters, so leveling up had been surprisingly easy. Most of the basic skills were already acquired. While his mind was on his growth, something shiny caught his eye sticking out of a hobgoblin's body. An thought it should be around here. He had not been expecting it, but it was a fortunate discovery. Without hesitation, he cut open the hobgoblin's body and pulled out a magic stone, thinking he did not know about anything else, but he definitely had to take this. He revolved the stone around his fingers, assessing it. With this size, he figured he could sell it for about 5,001. It was a D-grade magic stone. In his past life, he would have ignored such a small prize, but right now, money was something he desperately needed. Wondering if he should collect more, An glanced around at the sea of fallen hobgoblins. Deciding not to waste the opportunity, he methodically began retrieving magic stones from the corpses. After gathering about 20 of them, he finally stored the last one and thought this is the last one, feeling satisfied with the haul. If he sold everything, it would bring in a decent amount of money. Just as he completed his task, the ground beneath him began trembling with a powerful roar. An turned around, already knowing what was coming, and saw them. An entire army of hobgoblins charging toward him, far more than before. They stopped a short distance away, snarling and shouting amongst themselves. An calmly observed them, counting roughly 30 in number. He thought if he took all of them down, the boss would probably appear. These would make excellent experience points before the real battle. With a smirk, An said, "You have gathered quite a few companions from the underworld, have not you?" The hobgoblins shouted at one another, their anger boiling over, and one of them screamed, "It is him, kill him." Without waiting, all of them began rushing at An, who stood his ground with full confidence, ready for the next slaughter. An took his position and with a powerful leap soared above the ground, diving straight into the middle of the hobgoblin horde. Without giving them even a moment to react, he unleashed a storm of attacks, cutting through their necks, arms, and bodies, whatever came into his path. One by one, they fell under his relentless assault, and notifications kept flashing before his eyes announcing level ups and stat increases. Standing now before the few remaining hobgoblins, An grinned and said, "There really are a lot, I will finish it quickly." Tightening his grip on the sword, he raised it high, and with one clean slash, he cleaved a hobgoblin from the top of its skull down to its waist. Without losing a beat, he regained his posture and moved with lightning speed, cutting down the remaining ones one after another. His sword dripped with the thick green blood of his enemies, glistening under the strange forest light. Just as he wiped out the last of them, a thunderous roar shook the surroundings. Emerging from the trees came the boss, a monstrous hobgoblin towering over the others, wielding a massive axe-like sword and radiating a far stronger presence. Its level was clearly marked at 20. An stopped where he was, tightening his stance and muttering under his breath, "Here you are finally, boss monster." The boss monster raised his weapon high and brought it crashing down toward An, but An swiftly leaped backward to dodge the attack. The impact split the stone beneath into pieces, and as An moved back he heard a noise behind him. Turning his head slightly he saw more hobgoblins rushing at him with their knives raised. An clicked his tongue, thinking these little punks. He dodged their clumsy attacks with ease and leaped above the ground, shouting, "You small fries, do not interrupt," and with a mere second of movement he slashed through all of them with precise cuts, muttering, "You guys do not need to interrupt while the big guys are playing." The chief hobgoblin roared so fiercely that the air trembled. On suddenly felt his muscles stiffen and his body freeze up. He realized he had fallen into a state of fear. On thought, fear is a skill that induces fear, and its effectiveness increases the higher the opponent's level and stats. I never expected to encounter something like this at such a low grade gate, but this is a boss monster after all. His body would not listen to him, and from the sides smaller hobgoblins surrounded him, while behind him the boss tightened his grip on his weapon and laughed with menace. On looked from the corner of his eyes and thought, without skills or items related to mental protection I cannot counter it right now. The chief hobgoblin started running towards him, his massive sword ready to split on in two. Unclenched his teeth, trying to force his body to move. Thinking even without skills or items there is still a way to break free, he focused and quickly grabbed the sharp blade of his sword, cutting his own palm deeply. The sharp pain jolted through his body, snapping him out of the fear state just in time. The chief hobgoblin's attack was nearly upon him. On spun on his heels, muttering that was close, and used his sword to block the incoming strike. The chief grimaced as their weapons clashed with a loud clang. On smirked and said, "Shall I take care of the small flies first?" He quickly moved backward, swinging his sword wide and cutting down the low-rank hobgoblins that had surrounded him until only the boss remained standing. The notification appeared saying he had killed all the hobgoblins in the green-red gate. On glanced at his bleeding hand where he had cut himself, and without wasting a second used his healing light spell to close the wound. Finally, once the pain subsided and his hand was fully healed, he turned his full attention to the boss monster standing before him. An stood firmly in front of the chief and said, "Okay, so now it is your turn. Shall we have a cozy time, just the two of us?" With a smirk, both the chief and An charged at each other, their swords clashing midair, blocking and parrying in a furious dance, neither giving an inch. But they did not stop. The chief swung his massive sword relentlessly, but An was faster, his movements sharper and quicker. With every strike, An managed to land small but definite blows onto the chief's body. Little by little, cuts appeared on the hobgoblin's thick skin, though none deep enough to bring him down. An thought, it seems that due to the level difference I am not dealing significant damage to him, but the damage is gradually accumulating. He observed the chief's movements, recalculating his strategy. Then an idea flashed through his mind. He decided to exploit the wounds he had already inflicted. Finding a cut he had made earlier on the chief's leg, An quickly shifted his stance and aimed his sword directly at it. With precise timing he thrust his sword deep into the existing wound. The chief roared in agony, trying to muster strength to use the fear technique again, but this time it had no effect on An because he had already overcome it once. An pulled his sword out of the chief's leg and with a cold glint in his eyes said to him, "This is the last one." The chief staggered, unable to properly raise his weapon anymore. He was already in a compromised position. An, gathering all his strength, gripped his sword tightly and started to slash deeper into the body of the chief, swinging in all directions relentlessly, his blade tearing through flesh and bone until finally the massive hobgoblin let out a final groan and collapsed onto the ground. The chief puked blood from his mouth and threw himself onto the ground, his body trembling, but somehow he was still clinging to life, not completely dead yet. An walked toward him, bent down, and placed his hand on the chief's head. Using healing light, a warm glow emerged from An's hand and started swirling around the chief's broken body. As the light healed the wounds, the chief muttered something in his own language, barely audible through the blood in his throat. An said, "Rise, I am still far from done with you." The healing continued, and eventually the chief's body was fully restored. An's stats quietly began to upgrade from the use of his skill. After being healed, the chief crumbled onto the ground, unable to lift his head toward An, his whole body visibly shaking with fear. The notification appeared in front of An saying, "You exhibit an overwhelming presence capable of breaking even the forceful seriousness of a boss monster. Congratulations, you have mastered intimidation." An smirked, thinking, "I have mastered intimidation, I have learned everything there is to learn." He slowly drew his sword once again, looking down at the pathetic figure of the chief, and said, "Your role is over, you can go." With one swift and clean motion, An slashed the chief's head off and said, "You can go straight to hell now," as the chief's lifeless body fell silent forever. As An cut through the throat of the chief, he received a notification saying that he had conquered the gate, and that the MVP of the raid was An Suho. As the MVP, he was awarded additional experience points and a bonus stat. The system encouraged him to become even stronger, and granted him greater power. Among the rewards An received was healing light, a skill that consumed magic to heal wounds and cure diseases. Seeing the rewards, An thought, "Alright, I don't need to worry about getting debuffed now." If I continue to develop this skill while leveling up, I will be able to cure 10,000 poisons someday. I got everything I needed here, so now should I go see some familiar faces after a long time? On started walking toward the exit of the gate. Meanwhile, outside, the hunters gathered around noticed the gate shaking, and someone shouted, "The gate is shaking, it has been conquered." Another added, "Someone is coming out. Who is he?" As On stepped out. Crossing through the crowd, people started murmuring and chattering, saying, "What the heck, is he really alone? Did he conquer the gate alone?" Scouts from different guilds rushed toward him, shouting excuses like, "Please look over here, and I am a scout from Immortal Guild, and I am from Havarang Guild." But On ignored all of them, instantly jumping down and walking straight toward a man in the crowd. He approached him and said, "Hello, team leader Jung Cholman of the South Korean Hunter Association." Jung Cholman looked confused. His employee whispered, "Team leader, do you know him?" Jung replied, "No, not at all." Later on, and Jung Cholman sat inside the South Korean Hunter Association building. Jung was still bewildered, thinking about how earlier when On had greeted him and shook his hand, Jung had introduced himself saying, "Hello, I am Jung Cholman from the Gate Management Division of the South Korean Hunter Association. How do you know me? Do you have some business with me?" And On had replied, "Let's discuss the details at the association later, since I was planning to visit anyway to get my hunter's license." Jung Cholman's eyes widened slightly as he asked if it was a license renewal. Sitting across from him, On thought to himself that it was not a renewal, meaning he was viewed as an unregistered hunter, a newly awakened player. Jung tapped his fingers on the tablet he was holding, processing the situation. A healer class was known to be the weakest among the 4 class categories, and yet this man had conquered a gate alone. However, if Jung looked at the results, it was more like the work of a warrior than a healer. Meanwhile, On casually chewed on a biscuit and asked if there was a problem with the result. Jung put down the tablet, his face showing no particular emotion, and replied that it was nothing, then confirmed On's name by asking if he was On. On simply nodded and said yes. Jung then asked about his original occupation, to which On replied with a laid-back smile that he was just a college dropout. Jung blinked, slightly surprised, and asked if that meant he was unemployed. On laughed easily and admitted that he did not do well in college. Jung, however, did not join in the laughter and asked more seriously if On had been a medical student. On corrected him, saying he was in physical education. Jung's eyes grew wide in disbelief, remarking that people from physical education usually chose to be warriors or archers, not healers. On just smiled and said that he hated getting hurt. Jung found it unusual but pushed the conversation back towards the main point, asking how On managed to conquer the gate alone, and if he could describe the process. On shrugged and answered that there was no special process, explaining that he entered the gate, was attacked by hobgoblins, and simply killed them to survive. Jung's eyes opened wider in shock when he heard the word hobgoblins. On calmly confirmed it, and then opened his storage window, taking out all the magic stones he had collected and laying them out in front of Jung without a hint of hesitation. Jung was left speechless seeing the pile of magic crystals spread across the table. On casually said that these were the magical crystals he had obtained by killing the hobgoblins and the chief. Among the smaller crystals, the one he got from the chief stood out, much larger and shining more brightly. On continued, saying that he did not really know the value of the magic crystals and asked if he could leave everything to Jung. Team leader Jung, still confused but trying to maintain composure, replied quickly that yes, he would process everything as quickly as possible. He picked up the larger crystal in awe and, after a moment, asked On if he truly wanted to become a hunter. On smirked lightly and said that yes, he had made that decision the moment he awakened as a player. Jung's face lit up with excitement for a second, saying it was a great decision, but he quickly coughed and forced a more serious expression, asking if it was not a bit impulsive. He wondered if On had a particular reason. On smiled softly and admitted that he was not sure. Deep down, he thought to himself that he could not really hide his emotions well. He spoke openly, saying that he believed there were many reasons why people became hunters, but for him, it was different. He hated monsters and ghosts more than anything. His entire family had been lost to a ghost shock, and even though he knew how dangerous this path was, entering the gate alone had been a decision fueled by pure emotion. He explained that he had wondered if killing monsters would ease the frustration inside him. Even after killing those monsters, the anger and sadness still lingered in his heart. That was when he instinctively realized what he needed to do. He did not want there to be any more victims like him. He did not want anyone else to lose something precious to monsters. With a firm tone, On said he wanted to work for everyone's safety. He wanted to become a hunter of the South Korean Hunter Association. An looked straight at Jung Cholman and said with conviction that he wanted to be a hunter of the South Korean Hunter Association. Jung's eyes widened in shock as he hurriedly tried to gather his thoughts. After a brief pause, he spoke, still confused, saying that he was really happy to hear that but asked if An was truly sure. He explained that becoming part of the South Korean Hunter Association meant living as a civil servant hunter, and as An must know, their salary was quite a bit lower compared to the hunters and private guilds. An, calm and firm, replied that he was already aware of that. What he valued more than the pay was the free access to various gates, the priority on conquering them, and the strict punishments imposed for player crimes, all things that the South Korean Hunter Association offered. Jung's face twisted even more with confusion and disbelief as he leaned forward, asking what exactly An meant by that. An clarified that he wanted to work in the field, preferably at the forefront of gate conquests. Jung blinked in disbelief, his mind spinning. He thought to himself that even though the association had priority conquest rights for many gates, they usually auctioned them off to private guilds. The reason was obvious: there was no point in risking their lives for a small salary. People often spoke about joining out of altruism, but in reality, most civil servant hunters chose the job because it was stable, allowing them to earn money without even stepping into gates. Most of them desperately tried to avoid field assignments. Yet here stood An, someone who wanted to dive straight into danger, talking about protecting others. Jung felt dizzy at the thought. An was the very definition of an ideal civil servant hunter. Overwhelmed, Jung leaned back in his chair, put his hand over his forehead, and stared at the ceiling, as if trying to calm down. Watching him like that, An asked with slight concern if he was okay. Jung Cholman smiled and said that it had been a long time since he had met someone like An Suho. He promised to finish filling out the necessary documentation and identification so An could take the hunter exam. He explained that An would now need to complete the aptitude test, the written exam, and the practical exam. An remained silent, listening carefully. Jung continued, mentioning that the registration for this year's exam had already closed, and that tomorrow was the exam day. Hearing that, An's face froze in shock, his mouth slightly open. But before An could say anything, Jung quickly added that if An wanted, he could register him additionally. An asked with a hopeful smile if that was really possible. Jung chuckled and said that it was part of the existing rules. Since An had conquered a gate alone, he could report it to the higher-ups and get approval for a special registration. Jung admitted that he recommended An because of his excellent talent, but also warned that preparing for both the written and practical exams in just one day would be very difficult. He wasn't too worried about An's practical performance, given his outstanding showing in the field, but the written test was a different story. An clenched his fist in excitement, and said it was fine and asked Jung to register him. Jung, a bit surprised by An's enthusiasm, asked again to confirm, and An smiled, saying it was a good idea to experience the exam once while he had the chance. Even if he failed, he could always take it again later. He asked if he would be taking everything all at once tomorrow. Jung thought to himself what a brave man An was and answered out loud that An could check his aptitude test result today. An smirked, brushed back his hair, and said thank you, but pointed out that he did not have any money for the registration fees at the moment. He asked if Jung could handle the magic crystal right away. Jung stood up without hesitation and said he understood and would process it while checking An's aptitude test. Watching Jung's reliable attitude, An thought to himself that even now, the only person he could truly trust was Brother Cholman. Smiling warmly, An said aloud, "Thank you very much." Later that evening, An was chewing on a sandwich and casually scrolling through his phone when Jung came over with a satisfied expression and said that he had finished processing all the aptitude tests and had deposited the money earned from the magic stones. He handed An the receipt and asked him to check it. When An looked at the amount, his eyes widened in surprise, and he said in awe that it was about 3 million won and asked if it was really correct. Jung, looking a little embarrassed, explained that as a civil servant hunter, he received tax exemption benefits specifically for magic crystals. Hearing that, An was amazed and exclaimed how amazing it was that it was duty-free. Then, looking at Jung with a bit of hesitation, An asked if he could request one more favor. Jung, who was also chewing on his sandwich, asked casually what it was. An explained that he had heard the association had a library with workbooks and reference books related to the upcoming exam. Even though it was late, with the test happening tomorrow, he felt the need to cram as much as possible. He asked if it would be okay for him to study there. Jung laughed warmly and said, "What the hell are you saying? Of course you can. Thanking him sincerely, An followed Jung to the library. Jung pointed to the entrance and explained that An would not need an employee card to enter and that he could feel free to study there. He wished An luck for his test tomorrow. An bowed politely and said to please be careful on his way home. Jung gave him a thumbs up and turned around to exit through the door. Watching his back, An smiled fondly and thought that brother Jung Cholman was still the same as before, always kind and trustworthy. In his heart, he knew that Jung would become the president of the association in the near future. Thinking about it, An admitted to himself that it had been hard pretending to know nothing all this time. It almost felt like he was teasing Jung, but if he acted like he already knew the future, it would have surely raised suspicions. An stood tall and said aloud, "Okay, now let's find that thing." He turned toward the bookshelf, thinking, I remember the major things that will happen in the future, but not every single detail. After all, I'm still human. It would be nice to get that skill. He walked over to the shelf and reached for one of the largest books, its sheer size making him pause. It's so big, he thought. He pulled it out, recalling that when he tried to get information about this book earlier, a simple notification appeared on his screen that read, "It's a book from another world. There are separate ways to use it." Curious, An opened the book to the middle, holding it above his head, expecting something to happen. But nothing. He smirked in confusion. What is this? He thought. It said that this is the only way to use it. He blinked in focus, just as the notification popped up again, but this time it was clearer. The Library of Memories is entrusted in your story. The Library of Memories is inviting you. The moment the words appeared on his screen, the book above An's head began to glow with a soft pink light. The pages fluttered, spinning around him like an ethereal vortex. The entire room started to shift, transforming into something otherworldly. Before him, a massive tree towered, its enormous trunk stretching high into the sky. Stairs spiraled upward around the tree, leading into the unknown. A screen appeared, this time in full view, saying, "Welcome to the Library of Memories." The light from the book grew brighter, casting an almost surreal glow across the entire place. An's gaze swept over the landscape in awe. This was no longer just a library, it felt like a doorway into something much larger. The Library of Memories, a skill that lets you recall everything you have seen and heard even once. It sounded like a blessing, but An knew it came with a price. Even painful and distressing memories, which human minds usually forget over time to survive, would remain sharp and unedited. Once you possessed the Library of Memories, you were cursed to remember it all. The original holder of this skill was a member of the Hexagon Guild, once an employee at the Korean Hunter Association. While studying in this very library and preparing for her job exam, she had used the same mysterious book as a pillow because sleeping face down was uncomfortable. Somehow, by pure luck, she ended up acquiring the skill. An chuckled to himself, thinking, I got this information thanks to her. I'll have to buy her a meal when I see her next time. A screen appeared before An, asking, Would you like to donate your story to the Library of Memories? An's thoughts grew serious. The overwhelming memories this skill provides. With this, I can restore everything I have forgotten. As time passes, memories fade and get distorted, but with this, I can capture even the smallest details. I have to get it. Without hesitation, An decided to donate his memories to the library. The screen changed, reading, Your story is accepted. The library begins to assess and document your memories. Immediately, An's body was wrapped in pink light, strange symbols weaving around him. His entire being felt like it was glitching, torn between the present and past. It was like reliving every moment he had ever experienced, all at once. After what felt like an eternity, another screen appeared. The Library of Memories has opened. Stories and memories that you have seen and heard are now accessible at any time. The Library of Memories will also recommend necessary information to the user. An looked down at himself. Maybe because this is an illusionary space, the recording process felt so strange, he thought. Now that the skill was officially his, he decided it was time to test it out. Straightening his posture, An closed his eyes and began to focus on a specific memory he wanted to revisit. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his eyes glowed with a soft pink light. The first memory he encountered was the tragic end where his trusted hunter comrades had betrayed him. An stood silently, his heart heavy as he thought, my last moment, yet I still cannot fully feel the emotions from that time. As expected of the Library of Memories, the scene was vividly intact. His gaze sharpened as he focused on the selfish traitor who had stopped the gate closure just to survive. I will never forget you, An thought coldly. It is unpleasant to relive this. I should have chosen another memory. While living through the memory, An saw himself falling from the cliff, and this time he noticed the screens that had appeared, screens he had ignored back then. Now, standing inside the memory, he read them carefully. They said, I want to grant you the opportunity to become stronger as the first to reach the realm of the transcendent. Rebooting the system of the player, An. An's mind raced. Rebooting? No. As the memory ended, An stood still, deep in thought. The system wanted me to return to the past. It sent me back deliberately. He remembered achieving the unity of the divine soul and earning his first SS grade skill. But because he had been the very first to reach transcendence, the system had given him another opportunity. I have never heard of anything like this before, he thought, his heart pounding. That means, it was not a coincidence that I came back to the past. Later on descended from the taxi and stepped out in front of the massive building, his thoughts clear and firm. Whatever the reason behind his return, what mattered most was that he had been given another chance. It meant he could not only prevent the betrayal and tragedy that had once befallen him, but he could also take part in the early suppression of the unpredictable gates that had caused countless casualties. An clenched his fists lightly, determined to give it his all. Perhaps this time, he could conquer the gates faster than he ever had in his past life. There was no time to waste. Standing before the grand structure named Nexus, An marveled silently. It was the largest private hunter academy in the country, and it certainly lived up to its reputation. He needed a lot of money for what lay ahead, and he decided he would start here. As An entered the lobby, a receptionist greeted him warmly, asking what brought him there. An responded that he would like to meet Director Kim Sue. The receptionist looked a bit puzzled and asked if he had a scheduled appointment. When An admitted he had none and said he had something important to discuss, the receptionist apologized politely and explained that visits to the director required advanced scheduling. Calmly, An asked her to simply pass along the message, telling her that the solo conqueror of the Syndrome Station pre-catastrophe gate had arrived. Some time later, inside the director's office, Kim Sue, an elegant woman radiating authority, greeted him with a composed smile. She introduced herself as the director of Nexus Academy, and An bowed respectfully, shaking her hand and saying it was nice to meet her. Kim Sue gestured for him to sit and said that she had heard he was the solo conqueror of the Syndrome pre-catastrophe gate. Her eyes sharp with curiosity, she asked him what brought him to Nexus. An sat down calmly in front of her and said he had come to ask for a scholarship. Kim Sue raised an eyebrow and repeated the word, a scholarship, as if confirming she had heard right. An nodded and explained, yes, isn't there a hunter license test tomorrow? I am taking that test too. She remained silent for a moment, studying him carefully before asking how long it had been since his awakening. An answered casually, that was today. At his words, Kim practically jumped out of her seat, shouting today, wait a minute, did I hear that correctly? So you are the unregistered hunter who awakened today, and you will take the hunter license test tomorrow, but you are also the solo raider of the pre-catastrophe gate that occurred in Syndrome today. An nodded again and said, yes, that's right, right after awakening, I was lucky enough to have a connection with someone from the Hunter Association who helped me secure a spot for the test. He continued without missing a beat, saying that he planned to aim for the top position in the test. Kim stared at him, completely blown away by what she was hearing, while An pressed on, saying that if he passed as the top candidate, he wanted to be granted the status of a Nexus Scholarship student, and, of course, receive a scholarship. An said, of course, you should also provide a scholarship to me, thinking to himself that it might seem hard for a complete rookie to become the top candidate, but he was a veteran who had conquered countless gates, and whether they believed it or not was their choice. Kim Sue fixed her glasses and looked at him with a serious expression, saying it was impressive that he had single-handedly conquered an unprecedented gate, but the hunter test was a different matter altogether since it had an average passing rate of less than 20%. An smiled and said, so here is my suggestion, if I do not come in first, you can just disregard me, and the same goes for the scholarship payment. She narrowed her eyes and asked, let me ask you one thing, there are also Hexagon and Prime, so why did you choose Nexus? An said calmly, because Nexus is in the most regrettable situation. She frowned and said, what? An explained that as far as he knew, Nexus Academy was the largest in the country, but in recent years, they had failed to provide a first or second place winner, causing the number of students to noticeably decrease. Kim thought to herself with a heavy heart that sadly, it was true, they desperately needed to show results, but there was no outstanding student who had grown significantly. She considered that if she accepted his proposal and he really did come out on top, the lone conqueror of the premonitory gate who passed the hunter test with the highest score, and if the word spread that he was from Nexus, the ones to benefit the most would be their academy. It was a proposal that left nothing to be desired, and there was only one reason to hesitate in accepting an offer that should naturally be embraced. Kim Se said out loud, "How much money are you expecting to get from the scholarship?" An asked, "How much does the scholarship for the top student usually offer?" She explained that it was a full refund of tuition fees for that year along with an additional 30 million won as a congratulatory bonus for passing, and if the examinee wanted, they could immediately join the Nexus Guild. An smiled and said, "As expected from the largest academy?" Kim narrowed her eyes and said, "But you probably did not expect this much. Could you please tell me honestly how much you would like?" An thought for a moment, and then said out loud, 300 million. 300 million will be nice." Kim snapped out in shock while An calmly continued, "Considering the additional benefits that come with passing as the top student and the size of the academy, it was a reasonable amount, and 300 million was not a lot of money for Nexus." Kim clenched her fist slightly, thinking that he was only stating facts so she could not really argue against him. After a moment of silence, she finally said, "All right, if you pass as the top test taker, I will pay you the 300 million won." Then she stood up, adding that she would prepare the contract, and asked him to look around for now. An roamed around the place with another man and said the more he looked around, the more he realized just how massive the place was. It seemed even larger than an amusement park. Once he enrolled in Nexus, he thought he would not lack anything. The man with him, who looked fully sleepy and barely able to move but still managed to tag along, said with a yawn that after all, it was the largest academy in South Korea. An glanced at him and thought, I guess they woke him up while he was sleeping, feeling a little bad for no reason. He said, "Thank you for showing me around even at this late hour." The man laughed nervously and said that An was an important guest, and this was the least he could do. Just then, An heard a faint sound and said, "There is someone on the playground. I cannot see clearly from here. Is that a student?" The man said he really is. He is training even at this hour again today. An raised an eyebrow and said, "Again today?" The man nodded and said yes, he is the most dedicated student. On the playground, there was a man wielding a long weapon, training alone with intense focus. The man called out to him, "Daehan, practice is important, but taking care of your body is crucial too." Daehan laughed brightly and said since he was already a third-year student, he needed to work even harder. An watched him and thought, Kong Daehan, I had formed a new raid party with him in my previous life. Back then he became one of the top tankers in the country. His mental strength and defense were immense. It was a shame that the position of a pure tanker weakened over time, but seeing him holding an axe instead of a shield made it clear that he had not yet found his true aptitude. Perfect, since it came to this, I might as well lay some groundwork in advance. If Daehan later joins Nexus, I could build a connection with him early and bring him into the Great Hunters Association in this life. The man walked on closer to Daehan and said, "Daehan, this is An, and Mr. Suho, this is Kong Daehan, a student of our academy." An smiled and said, "Hello, I am An." Daehan replied cheerfully, "Nice to meet you, I am Kong Daehan." An pointed toward Daehan's axe and said, "From what I heard, it seems like you are a test tanker. Are you planning on using a battle axe as your main weapon?" Daehan scratched the back of his head and said, "Yes, that is right." An asked, "May I ask why you specifically chose the battle axe?" Daehan replied, "I am aiming to be a melee user. After consulting with some experts, they recommended this. They said that such weapons need to be matched to your physique from the start to handle them." An nodded thoughtfully and said, "When it comes to destructive power, nothing can match the battle axe." "So, have you only been using the battle axe?" Daehan answered, "Yes, I am a bit of a slow learner. If it would take too long to try out different weapons, it took me 2 years to become proficient with the battle axe alone. Well, I'm not very good at it either." An thought, that's because it's a weapon that does not fit your aptitude at all. I wonder if it's perseverance, or just stubbornness. No, he should have tried to switch weapons if his proficiency hadn't improved from the start. An's face tightened, and Daehan noticed, asking, "Is there any problem?" An quickly snapped out of his thoughts and said, "No, just thinking about something else. The largest academy in the country is surprisingly luxurious. He paused for a moment and added, I think you should use a weapon that you are comfortable handling. After all players will receive stat adjustments. Daehan asked, is that so? An continued, yes, with skill correction effects, you can quickly increase your skill proficiency. Other things depend on personal knowledge and experience, though. In that sense, the battle axe doesn't seem to suit you, Mr. Com. The fact that it took you 2 years to become proficient at it shows that you and the battle axe don't synchronize well. Daehan said, really? I've been handling only this for a whole 3 years. An walked towards him, placing a hand on Daehan's shoulder, and said, if you have the perseverance to handle a weapon that doesn't suit you for 3 years, it seems that Daehan's aptitude is actually closer to that of a tank. Daehan blinked in confusion and asked, tank? An nodded and said, wear a kite shield on your left arm and hold a one-handed sword in your right hand, then your practical scores will improve significantly compared to now. Daehan hesitated, saying, are you recommending that I change to tank now? But wouldn't it be difficult to change positions at this point, especially with the test tomorrow? An smiled and replied, Mr. Daehan, what do you think is the core of the party? Is it the mage? No, the core of the party is the tank. The tank needs to draw aggro while protecting the mage and healer for the party to function properly. Then, wouldn't it be better to just wield a shield to use crowd control in various ways? A tank should handle at least one primary weapon beside a shield. Now, does that make sense to you? Daehan thought for a moment before nodding, saying, sounds good. I'll give it a try. An thought, it's a good thing you are not discouraged and are quick to make rational decisions. An smiled and said, good luck then. Daehan replied, yes, thank you. With that, Daehan turned around and headed in the other direction. The man with An, still guiding him, said, Mr. Suho, the director asked me to give you a tour of the academy. I introduced you as a guest, but are you here as an instructor by any chance? You seem to have a deep understanding of contracts and advice as well. An replied, I'm not an instructor. He thought, it would be a bit suspicious if someone without a license knew this much. An added, I suppose it would be more like a stakeholder. The man looked at him curiously and asked, a stakeholder? An nodded, then said, by the way, is the contract ready? It seems like quite some time has passed. The man replied, I just received a call about that. Let's head back to the director's office. The next day, the day of the hunter test, the area in front of the South Korean Hunter Association was filled with examinees, all of them wielding their swords, ready to obtain their hunter licenses. Everyone was in peak condition, having honed their skills for the day. Yet, the man of the hour who had conquered the gate alone, An, was in his worst condition. He had spent too much time wandering around the previous day, leaving him exhausted.